Hello there, dear viewer. Quick announcement before we get into this. I have COVID, so I'm gonna sound like shit, but we'll make do. So, the Soviet Union was the world's largest nation, historically, and during its time, from the Pacific Ocean through to the Great Steppe to the Baltic Sea. It spanned. It's had a tremendously turbulent past, from casual threats of nuclear annihilation to the genocidal purge of citizens every now and then, and throughout this series I'm going to be covering every major event within the Soviet Union's history, from its from the October Revolution to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Today, however, we're going to start with the aforementioned October Revolution. Now, the October Revolution, which could also be called the Great Socialist Revolution or the Bolshevik coup, was a revolution in Russia led by the Bolshevik Party and its leader Vladimir Lenin, and it toppled the government and then plunged Russia into a civil war, which we will cover later. It shaped the future of Eastern Europe and spiraled many other countries to have revolutions of a similar communist nature. Now, without further ado, let us get into this. So, some basic background information. The October Revolution was not the only revolution to occur within Russia in 1917. There was the February Revolution, which toppled the less than competent Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, and aimed to put into place the provisional Russian government. Now, you may think, oh well, since the crooked Tsar has been toppled, why wasn't everyone happy? Well, dear viewer, let me tell you this: the provisional government was bollocks. That's simply the answer I can give you. It was weak, it was riddled with divisions amongst its members, and by now the Russians had been fighting, well, not just the Russians, but they'd been fighting a war for several years now with the rest of Europe, and the will to fight was dwindling. People were sick of the war, and this wasn't aided by the starving and restless civilians. And by October 1917, Russia's national debt has risen to 50 billion rubles. The country faced a real threat of financial bankruptcy. Now, it's a bit of an understatement to say that the Russian people were just a tad annoyed by the Russian government's incompetence. It wasn't uncommon to see people rioting or just generally displaying their frustrations with political leaders, and there was a distinctive lack of fresh supplies, produce and other materials coming in, which only furthered this whole crisis. The workers blamed their foremen and managers, even attacking them. The poor blamed the rich, as they normally do, called them names such as capitalist, bourgeoisie, imperialist, and in some cases Bolsheviked them from their lands. I'm never ever going to make that joke again. I apologise. I've probably just lost half my subscriber count. In September and October of 1917, there were mass strike actions by the Moscow and Petrograd workers, miners in the Donbass region, metal workers in the Urals, oil workers in Baku, textile workers in Central Industrial Region, and railway workers on the 44 railway lines. In these months alone, more than 1 million workers took part in strikes. Workers' unions began to form in many factories and industrial areas. These unions were then able to negotiate for better pay, but despite this, they didn't change much. By 1917, peasant uprisings were becoming more common, and by autumn, the peasant movement against the landowners had spread to 482 of the 624 total counties, or 77% of the country. If you are good at maths, I'm not. As 1917 progressed, the peasantry increasingly began to lose faith that the land would be redistributed to them by the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks. While uprisings varied in severity, and complete uprisings and seizures of the land, hence the Bolsheviks, were not as common. Less robust forms of protest, including marches on landowners, manors, and government offices, as well as withholding and storing grains rather than selling them, were, of course, more common. When the provisional government sent detachments to deal with the uprising, it only went as well as every other time that a government has sent armed forces to try and deal with an uprising. It went terribly. In September, the garrisons in Petrograd and Moscow and sailors of the Baltic Fleet declared to their leading representatives in the Central Committee of the Baltic Fleet of the Navy that they did not recognise the new provisional government and would most definitely not obey any single one of their orders, which I think we can all imagine ticked a fair few people off. Time to talk about the anti-war demonstrations. In a diplomatic note on the 1st of May, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pavel Milyukov, expressed the provisional government's desire to continue the war against the Central Powers to a victorious conclusion. From the 1st and the 4th, about 100,000 workers and soldiers of Petrograd, and after them, workers and soldiers of other cities led by the Bolsheviks, demonstrated under banners reading "Down with War" and "All Power to the Soviets." The mass demonstrations resulted in a major crisis for the provisional government. However, the provisional government performed another war offensive against the Central Powers on the 1st of July, which failed, well, miserably. It was an absolute bloodbath, that's all I can say. The news of the failed offensive spread to the workers and soldiers, filling them with even deeper irritation, anger, and disdain for the shit show of a Russian government. On the 16th of July, spontaneous demonstrations of workers and soldiers began in Petrograd, demanding that power be turned over to the Soviets. The Central Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party provided leadership to the spontaneous movements. On the 17th of July, over 500,000 people participated in what was intended to be a peaceful demonstration in Petrograd, the so-called July Days. The provisional government, with support of the Social Revolutionaries and the Bolsheviks, the Russian committee ordered an armed attack against the demonstrators, killing hundreds. Which, I mean, I'm not sure what you'd expect when that seems to be their go-to way of dealing with any of this. Now on to the Kornilov affair, the man that looks like a Tintin villain. General Levar Kornilov, who had been Commander-in-Chief since the 18th of July, with Kerensky's agreement, directed an army under Alexander Krimov to march towards Petrograd to restore order from the Bolsheviks, etc. Details remain sketchy, but apparently Kerensky appeared to become frightened by the possibility that the army would stage a coup and reverse the order. On the 27th of August, feeling betrayed by the new government, Kornilov pushed on towards Petrograd with few troops to spare at the front. Kerensky turned to the Petrograd Soviet for help. Bolsheviks, Mensheviks and social revolutionaries confronted the army and convinced them to stand down. The Bolsheviks' influence over the railroad and telegraph workers also proved vital in stopping the movement of troops. The first direct consequence of Kornilov's failed coup was the formal abolition of the monarchy and the proclamation of the Russian Republic on the 1st of... With Kornilov defeated, the Bolsheviks' popularity in the Soviets only grew significantly, both in central and local areas. On the 31st of August, the Petrograd Soviet of Workers and Soldiers deputies and the 5th of September, the Moscow Soviet Workers deputies adopted the Bolshevik revolutions on the question of power. The Bolsheviks won a majority in the Soviets of Bryansk, Samara, Saratov, Tsaritsyn, Minsk, Kiev, Tashkent and other various cities. Now to meet our old friends, the pesky Germans. Now, the Russian leaders were about to have a whole new enemy on the playing field. Vladimir Lenin, who had been living in exile in Switzerland, organised a plan to negotiate passage through Germany to Russia, who were then at war with them. Recognising these distance could cause problems for the Russian enemies, the German government agreed to permit 32 Russian citizens, among them Lenin and his wife, to travel in a sealed train carriage through the territory into Russia. Now, dear viewer, this is when things in Russia start to get a little bit more spicy. Now, back to our ever-so-calm friends, the Bolsheviks. On the 10th of January, the Bolsheviks voted 10-2 that an armed uprising would be inevitable, and now the time for it was fully ripe. At this Central Committee meeting, Lenin said that the people of Russia had waited long enough, and now was the time to liberate them by seizing power. Because, of course, when were the Bolsheviks ever repressive of views and society? Lenin expressed his confidence in the success of the planned insurrections. His confidence stemmed from the months of Bolshevik build-up of power and successful elections to different committees and councils in major cities such as Petrograd and Moscow. The Bolsheviks created a revolutionary military committee with the Petrograd Soviet led by the Soviet President Trotsky. The committee included armed workers, sailors, soldiers, etc., and assured the support or neutrality of the capital's garrison. Now, the Bolsheviks weren't exactly careful about this strategy or their preparations, given that both the president, Alexander Kerensky, was aware of them, and that they were published in the newspaper, which you can imagine raised quite a few red flags. Jesus Christ, I'm on fire with these puns today. Now, the final assault against the Winter Palace against 3,000 officers, Cossacks and female soldiers was really not resisted. While the cabinet squabbled amongst themselves on deciding what action to take, the Soviets issued them with an ultimatum to surrender. The workers and soldiers occupied the last of the telegraph stations, which cut off their communications with the loyal military forces outside the city, and at 9:45, the cruiser Aurora fired a blank shot from the harbour, and some of the revolutionaries entered the palace at 10:25, and then there was a mass entry 3 hours later. By 2 a.m. on the 26th of October, Bolshevik forces had gained complete control. The cadets and the 140 volunteers of the Women's Battalion surrendered rather than resist the 40,000-strong attacking force. After sporadic gunfire throughout the building, the cabinet of the provisional government surrendered and were imprisoned in Peter and Paul Fortress. The only member who was not arrested was Kerensky himself, who had already fled the palace. With the Petrograd Soviet now in complete control of the government, garrison and proletariat, Trotsky dismissed the opposing Mensheviks and social revolutionaries from the Congress. When the fall of the Winter Palace was announced, the Congress adopted a decree transferring power to the Soviets of workers, soldiers and peasants' deputies, thus ratifying the revolution. However, this transfer of power was deeply controversial. The centre and right wings of the socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks agreed that the Bolsheviks had seized power illegally and walked out before this resolution was passed. As they exited, they were taunted by Trotsky, who told them, "You are pitiful, isolated individuals. You are bankrupts. Your role is played out. Go where you belong from now, into the dustbin of history." You tell him, Trotsky, with that weirdly specific dustbin imagery. Now, the next day, the 26th, the Bolshevik cabinet was announced, labelled as the Council of People's Commissars. This was in fact named by Lenin, who reportedly stated that it smells of revolution, which is an interesting description. I'll be honest, that's tad strange, but we'll look over it. The cabinet quickly passed decrees on land and peace. This new government was also called the Provisional Government until the assembly was fully dissolved. However, this new government style system that Lenin had put into place was not really all that popular amongst many of the people, and it seemed to be the beginning of a model of dictatorship. This eventually led to him being shot during an assassination attempt, which I'm sure you can guess, injured but really didn't kill him, sadly. This also led to the Russian Civil War, which we'll cover next. The Bolsheviks viewed themselves as representing an alliance of workers and peasants signified by the hammer and sickle on their flag and the coat of arms of the Soviet Union. Other decrees that they introduced included all private property were nationalised by the government, Russian bank accounts were nationalised, private bank accounts were expropriated, the properties of the Russian Orthodox Church, including bank accounts, were expropriated, all foreign debts were repudiated. The control of factories was given to the Soviets, and wages were fixed at higher rates during the war, and shorter 8-hour working days were introduced. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video as much as I enjoyed making it. I'm looking forward to doing this new series, and I hope we're nearly at 500 subscribers, and honestly, it's great to see how fast my subscriber count's actually been going up after my most recent videos, and I'm really glad, and it's all the support you guys give, and those who stick around till the end of these videos really are the people that have helped this YouTube channel to grow as much as it had. I mean, I didn't expect to be here, like, what is it, a year and 3 months in, maybe? A year and 4 months? But nevertheless, it's honestly amazing what we've done on this channel. I'd like to thank each of you individually for it. And also, actually, go ahead, join my Discord in the comments section. That's where you can chat to me, and we can discuss ideas and everything. It's really not as active as it should be, but yeah, no, I want to get that active, so I'll see you all later. Das vidanya.